We developed a large Ukrainian military establishment, trained and equipped it, aimed it at Russia, and we're preparing to launch it. And we had all of these biolabs engaged in very, very dangerous research with a bioweapon orientation towards the Russians. And then on top of that, you had people that saw this as an opportunity to, quote unquote, harm Russia economically as well as socially.
What if everything you thought about this war was a lie? What if the truth was buried beneath layers of deception hidden from the public eye? A grand strategy unfolding in the shadows, a force built, trained, and unleashed with a singular purpose. And now, after years of silent preparation, the consequences are coming home to roost. Macgregor paints a picture of a war that was never just about Ukraine. He suggests that Western powers meticulously crafted and armed Ukraine's military, turning it into a weapon aimed directly at Russia. He claims dangerous bio-research was in play, fueling a deeper, more sinister agenda. And behind it all, a calculated effort to destabilize Russia, militarily, economically, and socially. We've just unpacked the analysis of Douglas Macgregor, and now it's time to shift gears to another crucial development, one that signals a growing crisis in the geopolitical chess game. The situation on the ground in Ukraine is rapidly evolving, with Russia making significant territorial advances and the political dynamics between Kyiv and Washington becoming increasingly tense. In this new chapter of Cold War II, we must ask, has the West created a monster? And what does the fall of Ulakli mean for the broader war? Let's break it all down. The war in Ukraine has always been about more than just the battlefield. It's also about political maneuvering and shifting alliances. One of the biggest developments in recent days has been the strained relationship between Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and the United States, particularly with President Donald Trump. Reports indicate that Trump was so frustrated with Zelensky during U.S.-Russia negotiations that he nearly cut off military aid to Ukraine entirely. This marks a dramatic shift in U.S. policy, especially as more reports surface, suggesting that Washington has already begun reducing the supply of weapons to Ukraine. According to White House insiders, there's growing concern that Zelensky has become too accustomed to unwavering Western support. The Biden administration and NATO allies have provided him with massive financial and military assistance, but some officials now believe that this has emboldened him to overplay his hand in negotiations. One official even remarked that the U.S. has created a monster out of Zelensky, a leader who no longer sees limits in his demands for aid. This sentiment is echoed by another White House official, who compared Zelensky to an actor who has lost himself in his role. The comment is a nod to his past as a comedian and television star before entering politics. Initially hailed as a defender of democracy, Zelensky's image has been evolving in Western narratives. He has been portrayed as everything from a heroic wartime leader to an illegitimate president, a dictator, and now, according to some sources, even a liability. The shifting perception in the West could have serious consequences for Ukraine, especially if U.S. and European leaders decide to reduce their support. One of the clearest indications of this political turbulence is the suggestion that Zelensky should leave Ukraine and seek refuge in France. The New York Post, citing Trump insiders, reported that there have been discussions about relocating Zelensky to Paris under President Emmanuel Macron's protection. This fuels speculation that Western leaders might already be preparing for a future where Zelensky is no longer in power. Macron, however, is playing a complex game. He has publicly stated that France has no immediate plans to send troops to Ukraine, though he has left the door open for possible peacekeeping missions. At the same time, Macron remains one of the few Western leaders who still recognizes Zelensky as Ukraine's legitimate president, underscoring the political isolation Kyiv is beginning to face. While political tensions mount, the war on the ground is taking a dire turn for Ukraine. Russian forces have made significant territorial gains, with their latest success being the capture of Ulakli. This advance is part of a broader Russian offensive that has seen them secure multiple key settlements in recent days. According to the Russian Ministry of Defense, their troops launched an offensive that quickly overwhelmed Ukrainian defenses, allowing them to seize control of Novosilka. The speed of this operation was staggering. One attack was all it took for Ukraine's defense lines to collapse. Russian forces are now regrouping, with their sights set on advancing further towards Vuhledar. The distance between Russian positions in the village is now less than 4 kilometers, putting Ukraine in a vulnerable position. Additionally, Russian forces have captured another key stronghold northwest of Vasyukivka, Ukrainian troops have been forced to retreat from multiple fortified positions as the Russians continue pressing forward. In another critical development, Russian soldiers have been spotted waving their flags in Novichorod, further solidifying their control over the area. Videos from Russian sources show soldiers freely moving through the village, marking another loss for Ukraine. The pro-Russian Group of Forces East has confirmed that Novichorod is now fully under Russian control, with additional offensive operations planned in the coming days. The capture of Ulakli is particularly concerning because it signals the potential collapse of another Ukrainian defensive pocket. Russian forces have successfully penetrated the Andriivka fortified area, advancing towards Bakhmut. Recent footage shows Russian troops raising flags in multiple locations throughout Ulakli. The presence of these flags suggests that Russian forces have secured key strategic points in the settlement. While Ukrainian units are still offering pockets of resistance, they are now effectively cut off from reinforcements. Given the current situation, Ukrainian forces will likely be forced to retreat towards Bakhmut in the coming days. This mirrors a similar scenario that played out in Nadinka, where Ukrainian troops were unable to hold their positions against the advancing Russian forces. Reports from the Russian Ministry of Defense confirm that Nadinka is now under Russian control, along with key tree lines and farms between Zaporizhzhia and Nadinka. The Russian strategy appears to be aimed at shortening the distance to Dnipro, a crucial strategic objective. The battle for control over villages like Ulakli is a microcosm of the larger war effort. Every settlement that falls under Russian control brings their forces closer to major Ukrainian strongholds, putting additional pressure on Kyiv's defenses. These battlefield developments are occurring against the backdrop of a shifting global geopolitical landscape. Russia's continued advances raise serious questions about the West's commitment to Ukraine. The lack of decisive Western action in the face of these Russian gains is alarming for Kyiv. If the reports about reduced U.S. military aid are accurate, Ukraine could find itself in an increasingly desperate position. Furthermore, Russia's growing influence in Africa and other regions suggests that Moscow is using this war to expand its geopolitical reach. France's struggles in Africa, particularly in its former colonies, indicate that European powers are losing ground to Russian-backed forces. Macron's ambiguous stance on Ukraine might be a reflection of these broader struggles. If Ukraine continues to lose ground while Western support wanes, the consequences could be catastrophic. The collapse of defensive positions in Ulakli and other settlements might only be the beginning of a larger unraveling. The war is far from over, but the tide appears to be shifting in Russia's favor. The situation in Ukraine is at a pivotal moment. Political tensions between Kyiv and Washington are at an all-time high, with some U.S. officials expressing frustration over Zelensky's leadership. Meanwhile, Russian forces are making steady territorial gains, capturing key settlements like Ulakli and tightening their grip on strategic locations. The next few weeks will be critical in determining the trajectory of this war. Will Ukraine manage to stabilize its defensive lines, or will Russian forces continue their relentless push forward? And how will Western powers respond to these developments? Will they double down on support, or will they begin pulling back? One thing is certain. The conflict is entering a new and dangerous phase. Cold War II is unfolding before our eyes, and the world must brace for the consequences. The situation in Ukraine is reaching a critical turning point as Russian forces continue their advance, capturing key locations like Ulakli and pushing deeper into Ukrainian-held territory. The battlefield dynamics are shifting rapidly. At the same time, political tensions between Kyiv and its Western allies are growing, with reports of strained relations between Zelensky and Washington. The cracks in Ukraine's defenses are not just military, they're also diplomatic. If Western support continues to wane, Ukraine could find itself in an increasingly precarious position. But what does this mean for the broader geopolitical landscape? Are we witnessing the slow unraveling of Ukraine's resistance, or is this just another phase in a long and brutal war? And perhaps more importantly, how will the West respond to these developments? The next few weeks could determine the future of this conflict. What do you think? Will Ukraine manage to stabilize its defensive lines, or is Russia gaining the upper hand? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay updated on the latest developments in Ukraine and global geopolitics. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.